Welcome to Instant Deck Techs. The aim of this series is to give you a short, concise guide on how to build a certain deck. It won't cover every card, but we'll go through all the categories and go over the types of cards needed to make the deck work. Any card mentioned will be down in the description below. The commander of this deck is Alibou, Ancient Witness. It is 3 red-white for a 4/5 legendary artifact creature golem. It has other artifact creatures you control have haste. It also has, whenever one or more artifact creatures you control attack, Alibou deals X damage to any target and you scry X, where X is the number of tapped artifacts you control. The aim of this deck is to flood the board with artifacts of all different kinds. We'll then swing through with some of our creatures, and with our commander out, we'll turn that second ability into a fireball effect to burn out our opponents. To make the most of all this, we'll be running some effects to help tap our artifacts to help make the fireball bigger, and we'll run some cards to get additional combat phases so we can do this multiple times a turn. Let's start with our mana rocks, as these are by far the easiest way we'll have of tapping an artifact. We're going to want to run between 8 and 12 of these in the deck, which is slightly more than normal, but as it synergizes so well with our commander, it's worth doing. I would also highly recommend keeping your mana rocks as cheap as possible. The more 2 mana rocks and below the better, as we'll want to keep playing them as quickly as possible. I'd also look at running Iron and Gold Mirror, as they are artifacts that can tap themselves, but can also attack in a pinch when we need to get our commander's ability to fire. On top of our rocks, we can run some additional ways of making mana. Things like Curse of Opulence and Smothering Tide that make treasure to add to our artifact count will be great, and Archaeomancer's Map is a great new addition that can ramp us while sitting in place and giving us a relevant effect. And then also there's Blinkmoth Urn, which will generate an obscene amount of mana with any kind of board state. Then there is also Crack Clan Ironworks as well, if you want to start sacrificing your artifacts for value later on in the game. This one is a bit all in, and isn't necessary if you don't have one. Let's move on to card draw. While traditionally tricky in Boros, there are still ways we can make it work. Let's start with some artifacts. I'm a fan of the Spell Bombs and the Wellsprings in a deck like this, as they're nice and cheap, they can sit in play and add to our artifact count, and then when we need to refill our hand, we can cash them in. There is also some more pricey artifacts that you can run, which will draw us a ton of cards. Due to the large amount of ramp we'll be running in this deck, they become way more playable, as we're going to be much more likely to be able to cast them and use them. Moving on to interaction, killing things in white and red has never really been much of a problem, so there's plenty of options out there for you. You can lean into the artifact theme with things like Metalcraft if you want, but as long as you're starting with your 4 bits of targeted removal and your 4 board wipes, then you're off to a good start. I will also mention Knowledge and Power due to the synergy it has with our commander. I'm not sure how strong it is, but the fact it can be reused again and again may make it a nice mana sink for later in the game. To up our artifact count, we're going to want to play some cards that make artifacts. If that's on an artifact, then all the better, but as long as one card consistently make artifacts, then it has a place in this deck. I will look at these effects all up and down the curve, as it's something that you're going to want to be doing throughout the game. This is really a spot to fill any holes in the deck, or to make up numbers if you're short of cards. I would also look for things that make Thopters, as the added evasion will be very nice when we have to attack. We can also run some Recursion in this deck to help get our artifacts back from the graveyard. Things like Goblin Engineer and Goblin Welder get better if you're running the Spell Bombs and the Wellsprings we mentioned earlier, but in general these cards are good, and I'm always a fan of running some ways of bringing my threats back. Wake the Past especially looks like a really fun new include that can rebuild our board state from out of nowhere. If your meta is quite hot on targeted removal, then I would look to run some bits of protection in order to keep our commander around long enough for this deck to pop off. Bronze Garden is a very nice include into a deck like this, along with the standard Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves. Because our commander cares about the number of tapped artifacts that we have, we can run some cards to get them tapped easily without having to attack with them. This will save us from throwing away any artifact tokens needlessly, and will let us use things like treasure as a resource to power up our commander. As Alibou triggers whenever one or more artifact creatures we control attack, we can get this multiple times a turn by having multiple combat steps. This may be a little cute, but I'm a big fan of these effects, and it can really lead to a game win out of nowhere, as it can turn killing one opponent into killing 2 opponents. Let's move on to some more dedicated ways of winning the game. I've grouped these two together because of how well they work together, but Mycosynth Lattice and Hellkite Tyrant are both capable of winning a game by themselves. Mycosynth Lattice, meaning all of our lands count towards our artifact count, will be fantastic, and then with all the low cost artifacts we'll have and all the token makers, we should have no issue of getting to 20 artifacts for an alternate win condition win with Hellkite Tyrant. Then because of all the token makers that make artifact creatures, we can also run some spells that pump them up, with Chief of the Foundry, Tempered Steel and Jord Kadim all doing a great job of this. Or you can add something like Reckless Fireweaver to ping everyone to death when those artifacts come into play. Then as well, as we're in Boros, we can always just run a good old Gisela to make combat math miserable for everyone who isn't us. We can then also run Stryonic Resonator to double up the fireball we make from our commander, which when combined with things like Gisela and the extra combat steps, should have you finishing off your opponents in no time. Let's move on to some utility lands before we get out of here. Firstly, I would 100% want to run the 3 artifact lands that we can run in the deck. After that, I would look to running cards that synergize with artifacts, things like Buried Ruin and Inventor's Fair. The rest of your mana base will be very dependent on what you have available to you. We've recently released a video with some advice on building a deck with a budget mana base, which might be of help. Until next time, please like, share and subscribe, and let us know down in the comments if there are any commanders you'd like to see a deck tech on. Thank you very much for watching.